Paul Evans was one of the most innovative and successful designers of the late 20th century. He forged his own path and produced monumental and revolutionary designs in metal that were way ahead of his time. Determined to express his creativity, Paul developed a strong bond with fellow artisan Phil Powell, a bond that ultimately led to collaboration and a career. Paul opened his New Hope shop with fellow artisan Phil Powell, and both shared a common ideal: to make beautiful, useful things. When Phil urged Paul to create furniture and stretch his abilities beyond small objects, Paul took his advice and enlisted Dorsey Redding, a young high school student, to help him around the shop. Dorsey eventually became shop foreman of Paul Evans Studios and constructed every piece Paul Evans envisioned. With the carpentry and metal skills of Dorsey Redding, Paul Evans Studios grew from a two-man operation to a sizable company with large-scale commissions. Paul was constantly pushing the boundaries of his medium, always experimenting and always having fun. Paul was a man with an unstoppable imagination and an adventurous spirit. Dorsey and his fellow co-workers enthusiastically went along for the ride.
Dorsey, what was it like to work for Paul Evans?
Working for Paul Evans is like an adventure every day. You never knew what was coming when you walked in that morning or he came in the door, and you would just do whatever he asked you to do because it was a fun day. Working for Paul Evans was not a job. It was an adventure.
Do you remember the day that you came up with the idea for the Argente technique that we're standing next to?
Again, he just asked me one day, he says, "You know how to weld aluminum?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Okay, well," he says, "we're going to do something in aluminum." And so then he doodled some more on his pad like he always does, and he was in a sculpture mode at that point. If you take this spiral and go back to the sculpture front steel, there is that same spiral. He took that idea from previous years and made it out of a piece of aluminum. This is basically, each side was cut out of a big sheet. This was a sheet, and he drew on it in a black marker what he wanted. And then I cut this out into these sides, and then he told me, he says, "Well, I want it this wide here, and I want it to end up narrow, and then I want it wide again." So then I started making all these pieces and put it in here, and then as I was putting it together, well, let's twist it this way, let's twist it that way. So consequently, that's really how it evolved. He was very hands-on with this particular piece.
Always looking for ways to break out of the mold, Paul was ready for new materials. Always thinking outside of the box, Dorsey discovered a new technique for anodized bronze. This extremely moldable and durable metal had never been used on furniture, so Paul and Dorsey were ready to take on the challenge. Again, experimenting and having fun were the name of the game, and the result was something that amazed even the most seasoned furniture manufacturers.
So you have this fantastic, this looks like an Aztec sundial. I'm not even sure where the inspiration came from, but the idea of a circular bar that free floats on a wall was a design that Paul obviously developed.
Mm-hmm. He wanted to use bronze. He was after trying to produce bronze furniture and without the casting, because it was really, that had been done so many times before. So he wanted to do something different. This basically was a whim piece. We introduced the line, we had the show for Directional. They came down and we had the display all set up for him. And we had this in like a back room. And he showed him this last. And he walked in and they went to it like glue.
Wow.
And what is this? And that's when he opened it up and he says, "Well, it's a bar, and so and so." And they just looked at each other and said, "Well, we got to have it." And then 15, 20 minutes later, after they had their little powwow what they were going to buy, they just said, "We'll take it all."
So this was the first introduction to Directional of the sculpted bronze line, and they basically bought the whole thing.
They bought the whole show.
As soon as the buyers at Directional Furniture laid eyes on the sculpted bronze series, they knew Paul Evans was a revolutionary. Founded in 1950 as a contemporary furniture manufacturer, Directional embraced the exploratory designs that avant-garde artists like Paul Evans were producing. Paul designed pieces as fast as his mind could conceive them, and Directional readily accepted the challenge of representing his cutting-edge furniture. Eventually, Paul Evans' line was seen nationwide and production grew rapidly. While the workshop remained small, they were still able to fulfill Directional's orders and Paul's whimsical imagination.
Cityscape obviously was a huge line for you and very, very successful, starting out with the chrome furniture and then moving into the brass and the burl. Tell me about how it was developed.
It was probably the fastest technique that we could produce because it was cut the metal, put it down, iron it and peel it, and you were done. It was a new look, it was a fresh look, it was something they could relate at the time. The 70s was the look that was in, and the possibility of what we could do was endless.